Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Casey Lueders, and I am the host of Why Relationships Matter, a podcast by Goodie Nation. And if you don't know what Goodie Nation is, we are an organization that exists to bridge the relationship gap between so many deserving underrepresented founders, folks in the social entrepreneurship space, and founders who may not always have the opportunities to meet and reach out to the folks who could help better their careers and their ventures. We do that in several ways. We have cohort style learning, coaching, events, resource sharing. And one of the most amazing things that we do is we have amazing performance partners who help to bring these resources and lead our founders to greatness. And so we are going to be chatting with one of those performance partners today, one of our newest team members here at Goodie Nation. We have Ian, and I'm super excited to chat with Ian. I haven't really gotten to yet, so this is new for all of us, actually. So Ian, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Let's do it.
Okay, cool. Great. So Ian, first question, the classic Goodie Nation question. What is your professional origin story? How did you end up here, not just on this podcast, but how did you end up here at Goodie Nation?
Yeah, I love the question. So to give some context, I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I grew up as the youngest of four boys. And my family is very big on sort of self-reliance and independence. My dad has his own small real estate firm. My mom did a very autonomous driven job, and two grandparents of mine each started their own businesses. So I kind of grew up in a business oriented family that really emphasized independence and self-sufficiency. And then in 2008, I came down to Atlanta, where I'm based now, to go to Emory University undergrad. And being the youngest of four, I kind of felt like I could do whatever I wanted. And so I ended up majoring in philosophy, which didn't necessarily set me up with a career path per se, but definitely allowed me to kind of wrestle with bigger questions around purpose and meaning and things of that nature. And so my career really got started when I graduated and went into Teach for America. So I started out as a teacher. I was a high school social studies teacher. I taught 9th and 10th grade here in Metro Atlanta, on the south side of the city. And that is really where a lot of what I ended up doing began. I really fell in love with learning. I fell in love with coaching. It's also where I started to put together the pieces of sort of things in my nature, how I've always been starting things. In high school, I started the men's varsity volleyball program at my school. I hosted the first student faculty basketball game. And these were just because I saw gaps and things that people wanted. So I felt like I could put them together. And that's sort of a theme that runs through my career. So I taught for a couple of years, and then I ended up leaving the classroom to co-found my first venture, which is an education nonprofit with two other teacher friends of mine. It's called Next Generation Men and Women. And that was my first foray into entrepreneurship. And ironically, it was founded the same year as Goodie Nation was founded. So I've got to watch Goodie Nation's rise and growth along the way. And proud to say that Next Gen is also celebrating 10 years this year, which is amazing. So then I ran that for 3.5 years as executive director, and then eventually decided that I wanted to try my hand at some other things, transitioned out and onto the board. I spent a couple of years with the Center for Civic Innovation, where I was an advisor and then eventually a co-director of their Impact Fellowship program. So they had a lot of different impact fellows, people in nonprofits, for-profits, and all kinds of spaces. So I got to serve as a facilitator and advisor to them. And while I looked for my next own venture, and in 2019, I ended up launching my second venture, which was an ed tech SaaS company called Terra, which has been running now for 4.5 years and is really a goal tracker for special education teachers. Didn't start that way, but really morphed along those years, as you guys know. So, and then more recently, what I've learned over this time is that I really love a few things. I love learning. So I'm a voracious reader. I'm constantly reading different things. I'm really into positive psychology and performance psychology. And I love helping other people one-on-one. So now I'm actually a full-time performance coach where I bring those things to bear for folks in all walks of life. A lot of founders and startups, of course, and I do that primarily through Goodie Nation right now, but also just average people who really want to get more out of their lives. And it's something that I think growing up as the youngest of four boys, I was never really able to break into conversations. So I did a lot of observing, and I learned a lot about people, what we're saying when we're not saying things, how we act, sort of emotional intelligence things. And it's just gotten me really interested in that space and that kind of work. When you combine it with my teaching and coaching background, it's been a great combination. So that's what led me to Goodie Nation. I've always wanted to support the organization and be a part of it in some way. Watching it for 10 years, I was like, you know what, there's a position here that popped up. I might as well give it a go and see what it's like on the inside if they'll give me the opportunity. And here we are.
So how interesting. We went from philosopher to tech founder. I would love to know, I guess, a little bit more about that journey. A lot of folks may think like, oh, I have an idea, but I don't come from a tech background. So, I don't belong in the innovation space.
Right.
Can you talk to us a little bit about, how you sort of found the confidence and motivation to make that move, and any particular relationships along the way that helps to make that possible?
Yeah, it's such a fascinating question that I've really tried to wrestle with a ton in my own time. So my first experience with starting the nonprofit was a huge catalyst in my whole journey. I had two great co-founders, and we ran a little test program for students. And afterwards, we had some success. The students loved it. And I'll draw the connection to the tech stuff in a minute. But I remember we did a retreat early on. We did like a crowdfunding campaign. We had a little bit of money left over. And we're like, okay, well, what should we do? The students say they want more of this. Should we turn this into something? And so I had the bright idea at the time. I was like, let's start a nonprofit. And I literally had no idea what a nonprofit was at that point in time. But me and my two co-founders, we went up to the North Georgia mountains for a bit. And I remember vividly, we're sitting in the kitchen and we were all like, well, should we do this? And one of them was like, well, what does that even mean? I feel like we don't know enough to start an organization. I don't know anything about finance or accounting or how to run these things. Shouldn't I go to school for that? And I don't know where I got the gall at the time. Again, I think a lot of this is from my family and both seeing the examples of my mom is very much a go-getter. She just when she wants to do something, she goes out and does it. She doesn't really wait for people to give her permission. And seeing my dad kind of stand up his own thing and seamlessly run it for a long time. I think I got a sense of confidence and independence there. And I definitely got a sense of security too. My family has been extremely supportive. We talk a lot about privilege these days. I certainly grew up with a lot of that. And having that level of security, knowing that I could try something and not end up on the streets, to be frank, I think was a huge part of this too. But ultimately going into the nonprofit space and then really just finding people to give us feedback and realizing what critical feedback can do for your growth prospects and how quickly you can grow. That made me realize that, okay, if I can just weather the storm that my ego is going to endure by getting critical feedback from folks, I can probably do whatever I want to do. And getting into the tech space was, it was a journey for sure. I spent a lot of time learning before I kind of tried to break into it. But I just kept saying to myself, people do this all the time. There's ways to learn this stuff. It's not that complicated if you just are willing to put in the time, ask questions, learn from your mistakes. And so I felt like in the world today, if you want to have a massive impact, one way to do that is to create technology that can scale. That was really the initial motivator. I felt like our nonprofit was doing great work, but it really wasn't reaching the size and scale that I always wanted, which is sort of a recurring theme for me. But so I was like, you know what, tech products are where it was at the time. And so I sort of just dove in. And it's not to say I've been super successful. I haven't, but it's certainly been an experience. And I'll still tell people, you don't have to have a tech background to do it. It certainly would help, but it doesn't necessarily help with all the other things that you need to be good at in order to be a good entrepreneur.
So that actually, that's a great segue. In your opinion, what are some of those skills that
Yep.
make people good entrepreneurs that, may not have anything to do with how well they can code or how well they can, build technology? What are the skills that to you are the most important?
Yeah, well, there's actually some growing research about this too, which I feel like we ignore too often. So some of the things that are absolutely essential to being a good entrepreneur, I think, are one is just curiosity. Like, you have to be a learner, because if you're not willing to learn, you're never going to actually get better. Everybody who's ever started anything, whether it's an organization or even just a program or an event, like, that when you start doing stuff, a lot of the stuff you choose to do is wrong. It doesn't work. You could do it better. And so that's got to be a huge part of that. And with that comes humility. Like, you have to be humble enough to respond to feedback, to actually listen to it. It's, our biases are so much stronger than we ever imagine. I've read every startup book under the sun, and I still made a lot of the same mistakes they tell you not to make. It's because, wisdom has to be earned a lot of times through experience. And there's a great quote, I forget who said it, but they said something to the effect of, beware of unearned wisdom. And I think that's so true. There's some things you just have to do and you have to go through. But so humility, curiosity, resourcefulness is also something that's very clear that you need. Just being able to figure things out, try things, make it work, go after things. These are sort of softer sounding skills, but they're really characteristics that underpin your psyche, which is really what my work's focused on. And I think they're more fundamental than anything else. And if you don't have these things, not only are you not going to make a great entrepreneur, but you're not going to make a great leader either. Too many times we see people who come in and they're really amazing at pitching, or they're a really great coder, but they're so, deficient in other areas that ultimately don't let them take a good insight they have and turn it into a great product or service, and then grow that into a great company, which is a completely different thing. And so, humility, curiosity, resourcefulness, those are the things I usually start with. And then ultimately conviction. You have to kind of believe in yourself, and what you're trying to accomplish, because if not, you're not going to be able to weather the storm that is, the journey of entrepreneurship. So that's what I would say. It's not easy to do those things. It takes a lot of work, a lot of support. Communities like Goodie Nation are critical to that. It's one of the reasons why I've tried to place myself in more communities over the years. Because as entrepreneurs, I wrote an article once about how there's a founder archetype, right? This idea that you do it yourself, you're good at everything, you're the one who closes all the deals, you're the one who comes up with the deck, you're the one who designs the product. And, asking for help shows that you're not good enough, right? Like, you're not like one of these, Zuckerberg types, which is just BS, frankly. And what people don't recognize is, like, the entrepreneurs that we idolize, anyone from like Oprah to Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk to Sarah Blakely, like, these most visible examples are anomalies. Like, they are the ones who, for a lot of factors outside of their own control, achieved massive success over a short period of time. Not because they weren't skilled, they obviously had a lot to do with it, but it's such a rare occurrence when we ignore the millions of other successful entrepreneurs that exist, that are running really great businesses all around the world that you've never heard of. Those are the more common things, like the more common successful founders. It's just their stories aren't the ones that make the news and aren't as sexy. But when we start to try to measure ourselves up to these anomalies, that's when we get into trouble, I think, and start getting feelings like we can't live up to the billing.
Oh, yeah. And that's exactly why we're so curious about people's origin stories or, how did you get to where you are today? Because it's that exact point. Like we're champions of the wins. And, you can see all over our social media. We love when our founders and folks in our communities are like out there killing it. But it's the journey. It's the things that lead up to those wins that we don't always discuss as openly and as proudly, even when those things may not be, necessarily the things you want people to know about all the time. So yeah, I appreciate you for sharing that perspective.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Oh, yeah. So you mentioned that in addition to Goodie Nation, you try to be a part of different communities in Atlanta. Atlanta, like a lot of major cities, has so much going on all the time. So many mixers, networking events, conferences, happy hour, after work. How do you, within having a life and having a job and I don't know, needing alone time. How do you balance all of the things that there are to do and the networking piece of what your job with everything else that you do?
Yeah, well, I'll just say I'm very much sort of these terms get thrown around a lot, but I'm definitely more of an introvert than an extrovert. And I am not someone who you will find at all these networking events. That is not my speed. But what I have been more intentional about doing is I think you have to figure out the social settings that you are most comfortable in, most confident in, and really try to take advantage of those. Like I know that I prefer and really get a ton out of one-on-one or small group conversations. And so while I'm not going to necessarily go to all the happy hours that are out there, especially because, I have a fiance, I've got a whole, work schedule. The pandemic certainly made me less likely to go places. But what I do try to do is lean into my inclinations around one-on-one conversations. So, I'm very much the type of person who I'll try to set up, just meetings with people just to chat and catch up. I mean, it sounds really basic, but a lot of times we don't lean into that kind of thing. And there's something I've been thinking about that I thought could be valuable to share in this context. There's this instinct in entrepreneurship to constantly try to expand your network and to reach the next person. Like you make a connection, it's great. And then you're like, oh, well, I need to make another connection. I need to get to this person. No, I need to get to that organization. And so you keep reaching and reaching. And in the meantime, you're meeting these folks, you have a very brief relationship with them, but you don't really have a relationship and you just kind of move on. And so the reason I bring that up is because I think what I'm learning is there's this instinct as an entrepreneur to want to try to convince the world that what you're into and building is going to change the world itself. And that might be true. But the fact is that if you spend all your time trying to convince the world, you forget all the people that you've already convinced. And early on, you have usually a core group of supporters, whether they're co-founders, advisors, just random friends of yours who have expertise, who are willing to support you and say, hey, man, let me know if I can help you out. People say that to you all the time and you ignore it because you're like, oh, well, they're not the person I need. And what I've learned through my experiences, and I encourage other people to try to do more of, is to turn back towards the people who have declared their support for you and really try to lean into those relationships. They can provide so much more than what we usually use them for, if that makes sense. People spend all day sending out cold emails, trying to get connected to these big time investors or entrepreneurs. And sometimes you want to do that, but more often than not, you've got enough expertise, skills, guidance in your own existing community that, especially amongst people who've already declared their support for you, that if we just actually took the time to reach out and make use of it, instead of waiting for that, godlike figure that we think is out there, I think people would feel a lot less alone and they'd make a lot more progress a lot more quickly. So it's something that I really love that Goodie Nation does, which is emphasizing just, okay, if you have needs, let's connect you as soon as we can to other people in our community that's right here, as opposed to let's try to keep going out and finding like the next person. Investing in your existing relationships, I think I've learned is so much more valuable than always trying to just spark new ones.
I can think of no better way to wrap up this episode of Why Relationships Matter. I mean, there it is right there. And so, Ian, if folks want to get in contact with you, if they want to learn more about what you've got going on with Goodie Nation, what you've got going on with your new venture, how can they find you?
Yeah, super simple. They can just go to ianscottcohen.com, and that's where all my performance coaching happens. I actually am in the midst of doing a whole series about imposter syndrome and just the research behind it, which is super fascinating. But yeah, you can also email me directly. I'm totally fine with that. It's just ian@ianscottcohen.com. I'm always looking to make some new friends and help out where I can. Otherwise, I'm in the Goodie Nation Slack community, and I'm sure you'll see me around in other programming.
Fantastic. Well, I mean, I know I've certainly resonate with that message of you don't necessarily always have to go outward to build your network, to meet those next people. Ecosystem building doesn't just have to mean collecting business cards. You can
Right.
cultivate the ecosystem that you have around you. And I think that's something that a lot of folks listening, I hope you listening out there in Radio Land, will definitely resonate with that. Cultivate the ecosystem that's around you. And so this has been another insightful episode of Why Relationships Matter. And as our Goodie Nation founder, Joey Womack, always says, stay magnetic and outwork yesterday. Thank you for listening.